Let me introduce our wonderful panel. Immediately here on my left, I'm delighted to welcome Olivia Amati. Olivia serves as Executive Director of Elim Churches UK, providing strategic and operational leadership to support the mission and ministry of the movement. An ordained Elim minister, Olivia brings rich experience from senior leadership roles across the NHS, the Anglican Church, and the wider third and voluntary service sectors. Olivia's leadership is driven by her faith, her passion for the local church, and her desire to see spirit-empowered communities make a transformative impact across the UK and beyond. So please could you join me in welcoming Olivia. Next to Olivia, of course, we have Andrew Hawkins, the CEO of Whitestone Insight, and which he founded, a research consultancy serving public policy, faith, and media clients, and of course, working very closely with stewardship on the production of the Generosity Report, a third year in a row. With 35 years in polling and communications, he previously built Comres into a global firm. Andrew advises on the intersection of faith and politics and contributes to national policy discussions. So please join me in welcoming Andrew. And then to Andrew's left, please join me in welcoming His Eminence Archbishop Angelos, who is the Coptic Orthodox Archbishop of London and President of the Bible Society. He is internationally recognized for advocacy on religious freedom and reconciliation, receiving honors such as the OBE and Lambeth Cross. His leadership spans global initiatives promoting dialogue and human rights. With decades of pastoral ministry, he speaks widely on faith and justice issues. Please could you join me in welcoming Archbishop Angelos. And finally, last but by no means least, Dr. Rhiannon McAleer, who is the Director of Research and Impact at the Bible Society, shaping insights that inform mission and engagement strategies. She led the research behind the Quiet Revival Report, which explores emerging trends in Bible engagement and faith across the UK. Her role focuses on understanding trends in Bible use and Christian giving, and she brings expertise in research to help organizations measure and maximize impact. Please join me in welcoming Rhiannon to the panel. So, I'm going to come to you, I think, Andrew, first, but panel, if you can also think about an answer to this question too, so just so you know. This is the third report. We're 3 years into the research. Looking at the big picture, how would you summarize the state of Christian giving in the UK? What do you think the key takeaways are, and were there any findings that surprised you?
Thank you very much, Jenny. Well, first of all, I would just like to say how impressed I am that the room is this full, and I would like to commend stewardship for sticking their necks out and putting the resources on the line in order to do this for the sake of the church in the UK. So I think that's hugely commendable. So thank you for that, and for doing it 3 years in a row. With looking at the key takeaways this year, I mean, you'll have seen from Daniel's presentation that the top line figures, they do bob about a bit, and we can expect to have to look at the long-term trend to see where giving is going. But there are some discernible things going on this year. Obviously, the economic backdrop is tricky. I was looking at the figures earlier today. We've had 10 years of economic confidence in the negative, which is obviously going to have an impact. But what we do see a continuation of is that relationship between depth of practice and giving levels, which is clearly very important. And as part of that, that point that the 18 to 24-year-olds are the most generous is really significant, because they're linking that together with another finding. They're also the group who are most likely to, or among the groups most likely to increase their giving in the future. So that's great. So we're kind of bobbing along, but with a really great outlook. The second observation on the key takeaways is just this staggering contrast, and it's easy for us to overlook this, between the giving habits of Christians across all the categories, but in particular committed Christians and the great British public, the wider British public. The gap is staggering. Committed Christians give 4.5 times more than the UK average, 4.5 times. And that is down clearly to Christian discipleship. And when I think of Matthew 6:21, you know, who knew? Jesus was right when he said, where your heart is, there your treasure is. And that shows up very clearly in the data. And I think that's cause for great encouragement. And the third aspect of this is around trust, and across all types of giving. We might describe trust as the kind of the primary currency, no pun intended, of giving, now determining the depth and consistency of giving. In terms of surprises, I'd like to cite two things, if I may. One of those is that perhaps it may seem a minor thing, but there's evidence that of low trust giving people who don't trust their church at all, but still give. And so there is a category of giving which is precarious because it's not predicated on trust. But it's a minor thing, but I think it's still helpful to bear that in mind. The major surprise, though, is when it comes to church teaching. And this is, I think, one of the key takeaways that I'd really like to reinforce today. Almost half of 18 to 34-year-olds overall, and that rises to 60% of committed Christians in that age group, 6 in 10, want regular teaching on generosity. But in contrast, only 8% of people in my age group, the 55 to 64s, want it, but it's my age group who have got the assets. Yeah. And that is, I think, a really interesting one. But why should that be? Well, I ran a little experiment this morning. I've got a bunch of blokes in a little men's Bible study group that we have on a Friday morning, and I asked them the question this morning: what one word comes into your head? What single response do you have when you turn up to church on Sunday morning and you hear that the teaching is going to be on giving that day? And I'm not going to mention names, but I thought they were quite interesting. One of them said, "I'm glad I didn't bring a non-Christian," which is interesting. Another one said that he was bracing himself for a talk about being more sacrificial. And another one mentioned that he said, "It's time to set my expectations to endure rather than enjoy, a bit like going to the dentist." When it's done well, it can be really inspiring. And in God's timing, the teaching in my own church this past Sunday was on exactly that for the first time. I think it was in 3 or 4 years that they'd done it. So that's, I think, just a takeaway from this, a practical takeaway. How do we equip churches and church leaders to feel confident about teaching on generosity in a way which conveys some of the joy that we heard from Lucy earlier about knowing that the earth is the Lord's and everything in it and everyone in it? How do we convey that? I think that's for me a big takeaway from this today.
Thank you, Andrew. And as it so happens, that is partly what our next session is about. Olivia, I wonder if I could come to you also from thinking about the perspective of church leadership as well. Same question, really. What were your key takeaways? Anything that surprised you?
Yeah, you've said most of them. I think you spoke from, but that's fine. The trust element was a real surprise to me, I have to say. But then when you dig into it a little bit more deeply, I wasn't so surprised, because you give to what you trust and to what you believe, don't you? And in an age where people are less likely to trust, most people will give to something that they do trust, because it was interesting. Was it one of those persons that spoke said, whoever they put in front of me, I trust. And I thought, I'm not like that. I'm just like, well, you know, I need to know you. It is relational. But most people have a relationship with their churches, don't they? And certainly their leaders. And so they're invested in their local churches. So in many ways, it doesn't surprise me. But what did surprise me was the point that you picked up on there, Andrew. And that was around, as you get older, I'm also in that age bracket. Yeah. I know I don't look like it. I know. Thank you very much. That's great. But it drops significantly about wanting to hear about the teaching of giving. And I wonder why that is. Now, unlike most of you, that my colleagues and my friends, those I don't know yet and those that I do know sitting here, my formative years were in a black majority church. And so there, giving was really important. There was no stigma to someone going up on the stage. And I'm thinking about some of those older women now, and men, many of whom have passed away and left us. There was no stigma about talking about giving to God. You were expected to do so. The more God blessed you, the more you gave. And many of those people were from working class backgrounds, having to scrape a living, send their kids to school, being in a society that absolutely didn't value them at times. And so giving was part of showing your generosity to God. Interestingly, I now go to another church, or belong to a denomination where we are not in the majority at all, and giving is hardly ever spoken about. Or there is some shame, much like you said in your straw poll today, about talking about giving. But perhaps what we've heard today in the findings tells us that talk about it. Our younger people want to know about it. I certainly need to know more, and my age group, because we are the ones who've sometimes got those resources. We've worked and we've scrimped so hard, we've saved, we've put money aside. But we will give to that which we think is valuable. And so there is a lot more that needs to be done. I have to say, Elim are very good at it, the denomination I belong to, and we can see that having a panoramic view of giving, our giving has gone up. So that's good, and our churches are rooted in their communities, so it's good to see that giving is an integral part of our worship.
So helpful. Thanks, Olivia. Archbishop, if I could come to you next as well. What surprised you? What are your key takeaways?
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you for your wonderful introduction, which is really boring. I'm so sorry you had to hear all that. But I think one of the key parts of my ministry is youth ministry, and despite the grey hair, I'm still directly involved. It's part of my remit when I first came to this country, and it continues to be. Yesterday, I was giving our fortnightly, which I do personally, young adults meeting in the city for people working around, and tonight I'm doing our campus ministry. So I'm really proud of our young people, and what this report has I think solidified is that we're very right to be proud of our young people, both in their generosity, but also in their prudence, they're discerning, and they do want to give. And I'm very partial to the. It's called the quiet revival. I want to add the not so at the beginning of that, because I don't think it's a quiet revival. I feel it in our church. I feel it with a lot of our ecumenical friends. I don't think we should be apologetic about it. And I was saying to Rhiannon, I really get upset about some people and some Christians say, well, that was just a blip, or that's not really indicative, because it is indicative. And let's just own it, and let's enjoy it, and let's give thanks to God for it. So, all right, that's rant over. Now, the thing that surprised me is that my position is very different on speaking about it because I'm really uncomfortable about speaking about giving. And I have never really done it except twice. What I find more impactful, and this is just me and probably the way we do things from an Orthodox perspective, which is much more internalized and much quieter, is that ministry speaks for itself. And I find that's where the trust element is. I think when people see ministry, they're inspired, and when they hear about opportunities, they will give. You know, we have 50 parishes across the UK, and they are all totally self-funded in everything. We employ our priests. They're not bivocational. And when I employ new priests, I make sure to match the salaries they're getting. And all of our priests are professionals, from a professional background. And they're all totally funded by their own congregations. So I think we're very privileged to have very generous congregations in that sense. But the report, I think, highlights what I've known about our own young people, is in that it is all very relational, and it does come back to trust. I may not speak about giving financially, but I will signpost Nehemiah, who is a personal sort of hero of mine. In that he goes, he calls people, they respond. And I think that kind of messaging also has an impact, and I think it has impact with us. And this idea of the full fat faith is really important. In doing youth ministry, I've seen a lot of people who try to dumb things down because they're afraid that the young people will walk away. In actual fact, what I've experienced is that they're totally the opposite. If you don't challenge them, if you don't give them something to aspire to, then that's when they become a little bit bored and walk away. I was so thankful for the reflection this morning. It was beautiful, and especially about God wanting to share everything, and that everything is His. And I think when we give that to younger people and to generally our communities, they respond to it. Finally, I think the concept of people being intentional, I think, is really important. Looking at younger generations, and I think more professional and more ethnic generations as well, they like to be planned. I have very distinct memories growing up, even being sort of single-digit age, where I will be given a coin by my parents and told to go and put that in the offering. And that would be fine. And I'd be given a different coin to go and buy sweets. But the offering one was for the offering. And I think that sort of generational and mentoring approach is really important. The relationships, as I said, and finally, I love the fact that you're called stewardship, because I think the church is about stewardship. It's about us being individually stewards, but also collectively stewards. I think as Christians, our main thing is to be Christ-like. And if we look at the message, the ministry of our Lord Jesus Christ, it was to give without expecting receipt. It was to give selflessly of himself. And it was to call us to look at everyone, especially at the peripheries as well, who might need us more. So thank you for all of this, and thank you for the report and for the highlights earlier as well.
Thank you. Rhiannon, I'd be really interested in your views, particularly as well in relation to all we heard about the young people. Again, another exciting and encouraging year. Could you unpack that for us a little bit, obviously, particularly with respect to the correlation in terms of the findings with the Quiet Revival report?
Absolutely. Because as researchers, when we see someone else's data, we always go back to our own data and just check how it lines up. To the other panelists, you asked about was surprising, what was encouraging. I have to say, when I had a look at some of the questions we asked recently in other data that we haven't published, there is very strong relationships. Like, we're seeing the same kind of pictures, and that's so deeply encouraging. We saw in the Quiet Revival data that Christians are more likely than non-Christians to be regularly donating to charity as well as giving their time. So so much to celebrate there. I mean, the cost of living crisis is affecting everyone so deeply. Office of National Statistics in this month said that 62% of households have said that they are affected by the cost of living increase. And YouGov, similarly, 56% of people saying that they have had to make cuts recently as a result of the financial pressures that they're living on. So the fact that Christians are sustaining giving, committed Christians, is so deeply remarkable. And as we can see from the data, those that have proportionately least as well, young people especially there, is just, yes, so fantastic. We also, I was so encouraged to see in your data about the relationship with the Bible and giving. That's something that we've seen in a wider piece of work we've done, which we hope to get out in a couple of months' time, that really looked at relationships with the Bible and what's the impact of having a strong relationship with the Bible. And again, financial giving. So Christians who are what we would call highly Bible confident are more likely to give. So there is something here about good Bible discipleship. But what I love that your report brings out is the feelings that people have, this feeling of gratitude. It's just wonderful. That's so different to kind of what Andrew's mini poll, sort of, these feelings of fear and loss and lack. But actually the practice of it is so different, that we feel better, we feel connected, and we feel part of, what we're called to do. So that's really wonderful. Young Christians are more likely to discuss financial giving with a mentor. That really surprised me. Not because I don't believe it. I absolutely do believe it of young Christians. They continue to surprise me. Their passion, their bravery, their commitment, they are fully in. That came through so clearly in the Quiet Revival data, that if you describe yourself as a Christian and you are aged under 30, you mean it. And that's come through so strongly here. I found it surprising because I would find that really hard. And I think that's what's so wonderful about your work is it is provocative. It's showing how things are changing and how those of us who are older, perhaps in other positions of power, whether in the church or the secular world, our default is not the new default. And it's up to us to kind of read the new landscape and respond well to it.
Love that. Thank you. And I guess just building on that question and that comment, showing how things are changing, and obviously we've heard a lot about trust, and you've all kind of touched on that a bit. What are the opportunities for us, whether that's as church leaders or in our Christian ministries, from what we've heard in the report? How do we build on those opportunities, and how do we build trust? How do we gather the momentum of the way that things are changing? And how do we, could all of you maybe talk into that? Rhiannon, maybe I'll stay with you, and could you share some thoughts on that?
Well, I think we have to listen to what young people are telling us. Like, they're telling us they want those deep relationships. They're telling us they want that trust. They're telling us they're open to teaching. So it's on us to kind of grasp the nettle and kind of do it and learn from that. I think what we see in your data and other data that's come out is this very important dimension of the embodied. Right? It's about community. It's about putting time into people, and we are all so time pressed. We're so time poor, but that's where we're going to see the fruits. I know that there are many church leaders in this room who are far more experienced with me than me, and we want to learn from you guys. But I would say what's happening in our culture at the moment, this de-thawing we're seeing around religion and in particular Christianity, this idea that people are more open to having conversations, it is also a fairly volatile moment, and things are changing quickly, and it's not a case that we can just sit back and see how things develop. We've got to try new things, and we've got to be really responsive to the moment. But when I look at multiple data sets, not just our own, I see a sense that the church is strengthening, that the church is kind of concentrating, you know, like the people who are here really want to be here. We've mentioned full fat faith a few times already this morning, but it is so true. Younger Christians especially, but I think it would go up the generations. They so desire to have these conversations, to know, why am I here? Why have I chosen to be in this rather than not? Because the default is to be not religious now, that's not changing. But what an opportunity! And as Bible Society, and from what I see in the data, there's something about Scripture in this. You know, Scripture is a dialogue partner, and it helps us, when we know the Bible well, to orient ourselves into God's story, including how we steward the resources that are given us, as has been so beautifully put out today.
Love that. Olivia, can I come to you next? What do you think the opportunities are?
Yeah, it's great to talk about trust and just picking that up. And as Rhiannon has said, we live in a society of dichotomies, don't we? Where people are wanting to trust God, but they don't trust some of their civic leaders and national leaders. And so I think there is an imperative on us as leaders in our various places to not just talk about trust in a person or a leader, because unfortunately, I don't know if you noticed, we're quite fallible. Leaders fail, right? You only have to look at the internet, and you can find a YouTube video or something about someone who's failed recently. What we do need to do, whether we are church leaders or leaders of parachurch or parachurch ministries, is to do everything we can to remember that our trust is in God. And it's the Holy Spirit that leads us and guides us. Without his help, we have nothing, really. And our trust is in him and his ability to inspire us to good works, because he still is the foundation of everything we do. Every person here that's here today is here because of an initial trust in our God, right? And what he can do. The quiet revival, you know, I wonder how quiet it is, as His Eminence has said. We're asking for more of that. I tell you where my heart is. How do I reach people who are the 8%, who are in that 55 to 64 and 65 plus bracket, who have become hardened in many ways? Their views are more entrenched in many ways. How do we do that? Can we give them a vision that inspires them and helps them to see beyond themselves, beyond their local churches even, but to give, because you will always give to where your heart is, where your treasure is, and where your heart is, that's where your treasure is. The two are synonymous. And if we can inspire people to see that, then we can make a huge difference to not only the UK and to the division, racism, you know, all the thing about Christian nationalism, all of that, but you can make a difference to our world. And that's what inspires me.
Yes, love it.
Sorry.
Love it. Love it. Okay. Does anyone else want to comment on opportunities? We've got 5 minutes left. Yeah.
Can I just say just a couple of points following on from that? It is a heart thing. That's the, and that's also seen in the response of joy and gratitude, and in engendering trust. People, I think we need to have the confidence to be unapologetic in teaching on generosity. People are not stupid. They know the Bible contains quite a lot about giving. And if we don't teach regularly on that, we're holding something back. So that's part of it. With young people specifically, as well. I'm always struck by how much more open the younger generations today are to talk about money openly than my generation was. And I know this from an employer's perspective, that you give somebody a pay increase or a bonus, and before lunchtime it's all around the office, and you think, hang on a minute, people don't talk about this sort of thing, do they? But they do. People are much more open, and it may be because that people are living in a different accumulative world than the 55 to 64-year-olds did, where you've got less chance of owning a house. You might use Zipcar instead of buying a car. You don't buy CDs anymore, or LPs or whatever. The dynamic is completely different. And I just want to encourage boldness in it's what that 8%, or my grumpy old pals down in Devon bracing themselves. They won't brace themselves if the teaching is biblical and it produces joy, which it will do if it's faithful.
Thank you. I think one opportunity is to express thanks and appreciation. Young people get so much ridicule and attack and hostility for being young and shallow and always on their phones and that kind of stereotype. But this shows something totally different. And we see things that are totally different. So I think we need to break that stereotype and say thank you for being the wonderful stewards you are, and for encouraging. There's so much less encouragement now. There is criticism from the imaging they get on social media and from the reporting they get, and so for encourage. The second thing is to be a conduit of good news and hope and joy and giving. That's why everyone loves Christmas, because we like giving. And so it shouldn't just be a once in a year thing. And in terms of our fallibility as leaders, as Olivia said, what I found is the personal relationship. And that's what brings the credibility. It's the fact that, I love being involved with the church because they cut you down. There's no space for airs and graces. You stay grounded. And I was just speaking to some youth leaders and priests earlier, and I said, and my whole sermon was about get out of the way. He must increase and I must decrease. And if we're able to project that. And finally, the church fathers talk about two things. If you run after them, they evade you, and if you run from them, they run after you. And that is status and money. And I think in ministry, I think we should be bold about asking for, what the church and ministry needs, but to ensure that it is presented as a means to an end, not an end in itself. The end is the Word of God, the ministry, the stewardship, the Christ-likeness, and that's what it's for. But unfortunately, we've seen some ministries and places, and probably not so much here, but probably in North America more, and I don't want to generalize, but it is about having wealth rather than that being used for ministry.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. Why don't you give our panel a round of applause for their thoughts? Okay, Claire is going to come to you. Yes, go for it, Claire.
Thank you very much. Patrick Watt from Christian Aid. And thanks for a great piece of work. And the messages, I think, about the joy of giving and the importance of stewardship really resonate for me. Now, in your data, it's very clear that faith drives giving. The more committed a person is to their faith, the more they will give. Have you any evidence of giving generating faith and a virtuous circle being created, where in some cases by giving to a cause people become more curious about and over time more committed to the Christian faith? So I'm interested in any reflections from the panel on that. And then perhaps there's a related question, which is whether any of you have seen any data out there on the propensity of non-Christians to give to Christian organizations, and whether that looks different according to the cause for which they're giving. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Patrick. Andrew, I'll come to you as the data guy on the panel.
Thank you very much. Of the two questions, on the former, in respect of giving leading to faith, I don't know of anything. I haven't seen anything on that. And, but on the second, I have. I did a piece of work for an organization a few years ago where we looked at exactly that. And there are many Christian charities that face the same challenge of an aging donor file, increasing reliance on legacies which we know are unpredictable, which is why we did this particular project. Now, if you give me your details, I'm very happy to give you some more accurate figures on this. But I did a rough back of the envelope calculation of what the possible propensity to increase total income might be from going to non-Christians. And it was quite, I can't remember what it was off the top of my head, but it was quite significant. It was something like an additional 30% on top of the current income levels. As I say, it was very, very rough to model that. It's partly, I think, it's partly an internal and partly an external concern that in my observation, working with charities, that tends to come up. Sometimes there'll be a reluctance to go to audiences beyond their traditional audiences because of some could be a theological issue. And with some of the older charities in particular, for example, there's been a reluctance to engage perhaps with Roman Catholics if they've got a particularly strong Protestant tradition. So that's one internal obstacle to overcome. The external perceived obstacle to overcome, which isn't an obstacle at all, is thinking that people won't be interested in giving to us because we've got Christian in our name or because of our mission. And that's simply not true. That people, non-Christians, will give. And I think it comes back to the point about the spectrum, that we've put people in buckets of committed, practicing, and so on. The reality is there is a spectrum. We could have put those boundaries in different places, and up the cultural Christian end, which is where the real opportunities, I think, lies, where you have people who regard themselves as Christian. They would tick the C of E box when they go to hospital, and therefore they are open to being approached for donations.
Thank you, Andrew. Just wanted to check if Rhiannon wanted to add anything from your perspective.
Similarly, I haven't seen strong data or indeed any data that would point towards you give and that opens you to a faith, but I think there is good qualitative evidence about exposure to faith. So, for example, volunteering at a food bank or something, that those are good spaces for people to start to understand what motivates that kind of service. So I would imagine it's going to be in human relationships rather than distant relationships. But I think, and I'm just going on an internal Bible Society data, that there is certainly a range on Christian charities that non-Christians, or non-practicing Christians, perhaps I should say, would be willing to give to. So on one end, an organization like Bible Society, less so, because we are obviously explicitly Christian and spiritual. Salvation Army, Christian Aid, I think warmer. But I would also say that our experience is many people are not making those distinctions. So if you ask an unprompted question, perhaps you've seen this, Andrew, too, like, can you name us 5 Christian charities? You'll often get Oxfam or whoever in there as well, usually Christian Aid, which is great. So yeah, I think just to reiterate what Andrew's saying about this kind of spectrum, and we put people into boxes, but actually their world, they're not necessarily looking in that kind of way. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. Another question.
Hello, Edward, with
Jenny,
my work
can I
hat
come in
on.
for a minute? Sorry, Jenny? Just quickly, I don't think I've seen anyone giving, but when they see others give, they give. And I think for organizations, it depends what you do. So when you're working on wider issues of religious freedom, you get other people of other faiths contributing. So the less introspective and self-interested we look, the more people are willing to engage.
Yeah, really helpful. Thank you.
Hello, Edward, with my work hat on with Medair, but first of all, my church hat, I'm very excited to share this with my church leader. I joined a new church in the last year, and often the giving is the kind of the cough at the end, and there's a plate as you leave. And I think this will give a lot of good evidence to say, at least maybe the younger end of the church are keen to hear more as well. But with my kind of work hat on with Medair, I just want to pick up on the kind of fourth finding, because we would never be at the moment on those top 5 charities, and I'd love to be. And so, of course, we're trying to find people, and we're trying to reach new audiences and connect with new people. And if we're seeing 11% drop in people giving to Appeals, that for us as a kind of charity that's trying to grow is like, oh, okay, right, let's try something else. And I just wonder any more on that kind of data point, because I know in there's a kind of footnote about big appeals or mediatized appeals might affect the kind of year-on-year comparison. But where are younger donors finding charities? You know, it's great that they're experiencing joy and generosity as they do so, but is there any preference they found in how they're actually locating and finding and choosing which charities to support as well?
I'll probably come back to Andrew because that's a specific point on the data again. Andrew, do you want to give that one a whirl?
I think the point about appeals is it's broader than what a charity might simply categorize as an appeal. It includes events and so on. And the attention this year is quite deliberately focused, I think, on the propensity to increase giving through churches. So, and as I said at the start of my introductory remarks, that the figures will bob about a bit. It seems as if there has been a shift. We don't know the details or the reasons for that at this stage. So I'm not going to try and make them up. But I do think that that coming back to the church point, that what we do know is that trust in churches makes a significant difference, a dramatic difference. So propensity to give to churches that are giving. So I suppose if I were in your shoes, it'd be the church partnerships piece that I would want to be focusing on particularly.
Hi, I'm Lani. I'm involved with Langham Arts and Christians in Media. I'm just picking up on something that you've all mentioned somewhat in passing. Rhiannon, you mentioned that we're time poor, and we've mentioned that where your treasure is, there your heart is also. And looking at where your treasure is, thinking about it potentially in money and time, and where we put our time and how that impacts our financial giving. I'm just wondering if any of you have seen any trends, similar trends, in the generosity of how we give time and skill. Volunteering, mentoring has also been mentioned. And whether there's any correlation to how people give. I mean, we were at a conference, actually Dan was speaking at Faith and Fundraising Conference last year, where people also mentioned that sometimes people don't necessarily review their giving, so it just kind of becomes a background. We've given, we've forgotten about it, it goes out of our monthly whatever. And actually, if more time was given to a particular ministry or way of thinking or way of giving, then whether there's any correlation between generosity of time and skill and generosity in terms of financial.
It's a great question. Thank you so much. Olivia, do you want to have a take?
Thank you. Certainly from Elim's perspective, I'm talking about my denomination and some of the wider church that I see. I do see, my experiences, I do see a lot of people giving a lot of their time, actually. And if you were to go into any church, most churches or parachurch organizations, many of us couldn't function without volunteers. And sometimes the dichotomy is that we sometimes think, it leads us to think about giving as in money. And of course, that's really important. We need that material resource to be able to do the things for which our objectives point us to. But what I also see, and I see that clearly, certainly within my denomination, is people giving their time willingly, over and above. Some of our ministers don't actually get paid. They are bivocational and to subsist on something else, less money, so that they can give of their time to both minister to their congregations and also to minister good works, as we would probably term it, in their local communities as well. Certainly when I've led ministries and I've led charities, I have depended a lot on the time of people and their skills and resources to be able to help me, us, my mission, our mission, to be able to advance the kingdom of God in that way. So that's my experience. Someone else may have something slightly different.
Just on the reviewing point, that it's in the report, but there is a correlation between propensity to talk about giving and giving levels. And I suppose it goes back to the point about what might some of the risk factors be in giving, what giving cannot be relied upon, and it's the giving that's never reviewed. It's a little bit like, I suppose, not wanting to open your bank statements if you know it's going to give bad news. But the evidence points to the more generous givers being the ones who do review their giving more regularly.
Hello, my name's Joe Lowther from KIC, and I just had a question. It was interesting on page 47 of the report to read that Londoners give a 9% average proportion of their monthly income, which is really close to that 10% tithe. But I noticed that that's twice or sometimes 3 times more than the other 12 regions of the UK. And I was just wondering if there was any learning around what's going on in London that could be shared with other regions of the country around the percentage proportion of their income to give.
Thank you, Joe. You were referring to London specifically. It's down to demographics. London is significantly younger. It's significantly better educated, and therefore that correlates to people with more money giving more. And it's also, of course, ethnically more diverse. Those 3 factors are easily enough to account for that contrast between London and the rest of the country.
I think just another factor is proximity. I think in London people are closer together and people want to be in each other's spaces now. And I think that encourages more giving. So because it's a younger demographic, more ethnically diverse, and proximity, I think that all contributes substantially.
Right. Hi, Sarah Edwards from the Just Money movement. I'm particularly struck by the distinctive giving of people from ethnic minorities. And we certainly find in the work we do with churches around talking about money in a broader sense, that there's a very different culture around talking about wealth and business and wealth generation. But I just wondered if you had any further reflections on that, and particularly lessons that the rest of the church might learn from those black majority churches in particular about how we can have more conversations about money and giving.
Thanks, Sarah.
Who to answer that question? Sorry, just said it like it is. And that's why we give more, because we say it like it is, right? So the thing is, as I alluded to when I mentioned earlier, if you walked into any church where there's a black majority, and I know that I may be harking back to perhaps 20 or 30 years in my formative years as a Christian. But I know, having visited many black majority churches, there is no shame about talking about money. We ask because we ask intentionally. We want you to give, and if we have to get into your handbags or into your wallets to do so, we will do so. Leave your purse at the door, we will search for you. And I jest, but there is a culture of being upfront rather than, now I'm brought up here, this is my home, right? So I know that my white colleagues will not want to do so. And there is a reticence about doing so, and I absolutely understand that. But there is something about the gratitude. When I think about my parents, my formative years, there was a gratitude of God has brought us here to this country, whether we're welcomed or not. And we want to give back to God for providing us. And therefore, because we know his purposes in this world, for us, for our colleagues, the people that we live amongst, we are going to give as well. So that it's sewn into, I can't think about serving him without giving. I know that sounds a bit odd, but giving is a natural part of that. And it's not only my resources of money. The more I have, the more I give, but it's also my time as well. And so we will talk freely about giving in our community and in my home. What are you giving? Yeah, well, sometimes there's even that competition thing. You know, so-and-so is giving, now I'm going to give twice as much as that. You know, because God will love me more than my brother or sister who's done that. So I jest in many ways, but I'm just showing you that there is a cultural thing to this. And it was funny there, wasn't it, about the findings that people from ethnic backgrounds are planning to give more. That's interesting, isn't it? Interesting finding. That's me done. Thanks.
I think I've been here for 30 years, so I consider myself totally bilingual. And I think in the West, we have much greater propensity to compartmentalize faith. And so the church and religion is part of my life. But when you look at a lot of these minority ethnic churches, whether it's from sub-Saharan Africa or the global South or the Middle East, the church and their faith is intrinsic to who they are and their identity. And in their home countries, it is totally reliant on their giving. There's no other source. And if it doesn't, and what you'll find is many of the communities here from those ethnic minorities are also financing relatives and friends and communities back in their countries of origin. And they realize that, you know, as Olivia said, this is a gift to them. It's part of their stewardship. And they need to help their faithful here, but also help sisters and brothers there. And I think that's why it's existential. It's not an optional extra. If they don't give, the church won't serve.
So helpful. Thank you.
Hi, it's Paul Stewart here from Ripple Effect. Just want to say thank you for all the data and the discussions. It's really amazing, really fascinating. On page 34, it says, the wealthy, young, and ethnic minority Christians expect to give more. So we've talked a lot about young and just now ethnic minority. Are you able to give any insights into why the wealthy are planning to give more at this time, or whether that's a change as well over prior years? Thank you.
Back to Andrew on the data.
Well, not really, no. I'm honest. I mean, I suppose it's if people, it depends on maybe life stages, that if people are in their 30s, 40s with a view to still having several big jobs in front of them, that they would anticipate their giving to increase. I think that's probably I think it's probably down to the more sort of mundane expectations of life stages than anything else. Sorry, I can't give you a more informed.
And we are going to have a little chat later with our head of philanthropy and Rachel Cruz, who leads Gospel Patrons, later on the topic of wealthy and giving later on as well this afternoon.
Thank
Okay,
you.
last question. Thank you.
I know you keep saying, Andrew, you don't know all the details, and I appreciate that. I just I think I just have a wondering, as being of the age group that isn't giving as much, and I wondered if there's been a bit of a shift to parents giving to children, and that doesn't come out as giving, but actually in their hearts, they still think they're giving, but maybe are people diverting some giving to children and grandchildren and nieces and nephews and family that they are seeing struggling with various things? I just wondered that, because I've seen grown-up children more dependent on their parents than when I was younger.
I think there's something in that, and when it comes to people giving out of their savings, it's interesting that some of the younger age groups say that they're giving out of their savings as well, and that is exactly the thought that we had, that could be. It may be that there are other sources of income. It depends on what you mean by savings as well. It could be parental gifts. It could even be that people are borrowing money, and part of that is, or it could even, that if you look at, for example, the benefits reach as well, the reach of people on benefits, that could also be classified as unearned income. I think too, I don't want to be too, at the risk of special pleading, hard on the folk in their 50s and early 60s and that. There's a sense in which we are the sandwich generation, looking after elderly parents, seeing our own inheritance whittle away as thousands of pounds a week are spent on nursing home fees, and at the same time trying to look after children too, and their financial needs, and give them a legacy. So it's a very, very complicated picture, and every generation has its own challenges. But I come back to the point about being super impressed at the under 35s, at how they are willing, and Rhiannon touched on this, that if you're over 55 and say you're a Christian, the chances are that it was because you were brought up in a Christian home or went to a Christian school. You have a cultural identification. If you're under 35 and say you're a Christian, the chances are you've got a live faith. Sorry, that's off topic, but I think it's an important contextual point to make about the generations.
I think that's a really good point and a great place to end our panel. So once again, please join me in thanking our panel.